Employees more than ever want two things, and one is to feel valued, and that's where
Yes.
just recognizing sometimes the small wins, like that's even more impactful sometimes than the end of the project and the outcome that's delivered then, like the little things along the way. And the other thing is purpose. Also show me how I am connected to the broader purpose of the organization. Maybe it's our customers, maybe it's the planet by the work that we do. And that's actually where I think it becomes important for leaders, particularly for like maybe at the executive level, you have the ability to see that, but it's our job to bring that all the way down, even to our new hires. So we want to do work for and companies and the work that we do that has purpose and is aligned to our values. And as we do that, we want to feel valued within the organization.
Welcome to Unleash Thyself, a podcast where we journey into the depths of personal transformation, spirituality, and growth. I'm your host, Constantin Morun, and today we have an incredible guest joining us, Victoria Pelletier. She's a powerhouse in the business world with over 20 years as a corporate executive, a board director, and a best-selling author, and also a sought-after public speaker. Known as the turnaround queen and the CEO whisperer, Victoria is a beacon of resilience and leadership. She's been a recognized figure globally for her influence in business, diversity, and technology, earning accolades like the 2023 Women of Influence and Top 50 Business Leader in Technology. Her approach to leadership revolves around being dynamic and unstoppable, while her philosophy, born to lead and not to be led, embodies the resilience she's developed from overcoming early life adversity. Today, she'll share her insights on resilience, personal branding, whole human leadership, and the power of authenticity. Get ready for an enlightening conversation as Victoria takes us through her journey and how she inspires others to change mindsets and drive growth. But before we start, I have a small favor to ask. Please subscribe, like, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your engagement helps us continue to bring these transformative stories to light. Now, let's begin. Welcome, beautiful souls. I have the pleasure of sitting with Victoria Pelletier right now. Victoria, it's such a pleasure to have you with us. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
Yes. So I'll jump right into it. You talk about overcoming adversity and trauma at a very young age, which allowed you to build resilience. Let's actually define resilience for a second, because I've talked to a lot of people, from psychologists to doctors to spiritual people, and everyone has a slightly different take on what resilience actually means.
Yeah, for me, one, let me actually, I should state, I think there's a healthy way to be resilient and the not so healthy way to be
Okay,
resilient.
I love it.
I've had to learn and move from the unhealthy to the healthy. So for me, resilience is the ability to move forward, move past obstacles, adversity, could be trauma, in, again, much more of a healthy way. And so not letting it, set you back completely and becoming an obstacle from you being achieving whatever goal or objective you've set for yourself, or being a healthy, happy human.
Okay, so let's actually dive deeper into healthy versus unhealthy. You said you perhaps started with unhealthy resilience and then moved into the healthy one. So let's actually define the two of them and get deeper into it. And then, of course, how did you realize that you have to go from one to the other?
Yeah. Well, so, I mean, I'll share a little bit, first of all, of sort of what I overcame. I'm born to a drug addicted teenage mother who, like, beat me pretty severely, went in and out of the child welfare system. I'm fortunate. I was adopted to a loving family, lower on socioeconomic status or class. And so those things became a big part of what's caused me to be so driven. But, it scarred me literally and figuratively in many ways. And me, I've always been exceptionally resilient and pushing through all of these things. But the unhealthy way was building walls up around myself to protect myself out of fear, and insecurity, and to protect myself going forward. And I would also, when other things, so there are many other things that have occurred as well, some further trauma in my teenage years and beyond, to just challenges in the workforce, et cetera, that I would compartmentalize or just never process the feelings or emotions. Those,
Yeah.
for me, the combination of just protecting yourself, putting walls around yourself, and never dealing with that emotion, that's the unhealthy way of being resilient. And I did it for many, many years and realized I continued to have fear and insecurity and initial reactions to things that would come my way because I'd never actually worked through and kind of process those.
Wow, thank you for sharing that. That's such a vulnerable story and hits close to home. I also, now that you describe it that way, I've also been someone that had unhealthy resilience, so to speak, because I put the walls up. I wasn't feeling my emotions. I wasn't allowing any of that to come up. And I can 100% resonate with that. So, what would you say your trigger was to realize that, hey, what I'm doing, even though I'm looking like I'm tough, I got this, is not necessarily healthy for me and for my growth. And now I want to move into a different direction.
I saw and came to realize the unhealthiness of the way I was operating, both personally in the relationships I had and also professionally in how I showed up. And personally, I'm now in my second marriage, but I'm sort of serial dater in between being a serial monogamist. And I've had partners I've dated who said, one in particular said it's okay to let the walls down. Like he realized that I had them up and there was a way to protect myself. I experienced it in my personal relationships, and then from a professional setting. And it's not all stemming from childhood. It stems from the fact that I was a very young executive, and the only woman at the table for a very long time as well. I'm also part of the LGBT community. I was married to a woman before now being married to my husband. So for all those reasons, I was like, I need to be a certain way
Yeah.
at work. I am not going to show vulnerability. I'm not going to show emotion. And in my like mid to late 20s, and my first executive role came at 24. And so just a few years into like my executive leadership, I learned my nickname was the Iron Maiden. And I was like, "Ooh, like, ouch." To some extent, I initially passed that off as the fact that I am a very strong business performer, have driven strong results. I've been through many, many mergers, acquisitions, corporate restructure, those kinds of things. And I'd already done that in my first few years as an executive, but I never showed emotion. So I think when I had to impact someone's livelihood by doing a layoff or a restructure, not demonstrating a little bit more compassion and emotion around it. So I think it's things like that that got me the nickname of the Iron Maiden. It's not who I am. Actually, my nickname from my best friend is the Turtle. Not by pace, because I'm like the opposite of that, but tough exterior, very resilient, but I'm like soft and marshmallowy on the inside. So I realized that the walls I put up, the fact that I was fearful, one, because of childhood, but two, because I was this very young female leader in business, that I wasn't showing any of those things. And so when I learned of the nickname, and there was a couple of other things after that, I'm like, I need to do better. I need to be different, and I need to show up in the way that I am from an authentic standpoint. And it wasn't comfortable to like start to talk about emotions, to start to tell my story, to start to show some vulnerability. But once I did, that's when I was like, oh my gosh, like the world opened up.
Beautiful. And again, I can relate to that 100%. And I'm curious to see what were some of your aha moments at the beginning when you opened up because it was tough. But what have you seen the reactions from other people, either other execs, your employees, or anyone else in between?
I saw what I believe was the shift in, I think people probably feared me previously as a leader, and the shift to wanting to follow me. So the dynamic shifted in the way I led and how people responded to it. And that created significantly higher employee satisfaction or engagement, which in itself drives better business results. So I saw that. But even just the way I was happier doing that, I no longer needed to kind of park the stuff at the door when I walked in to the office, literally or figuratively into and so I saw that. And so what I've seen since is I've moved roles like every few years. And again, a literal followership that's come of people who want to work with me. But I see it in the relationships I have with clients. I do a lot of coaching and mentorship, and it's the transformative piece in getting people to open up and figure out how to progress their careers. And so for me, I could never go back. It's now just innately who I am, to the point that I talk to strangers on elevators. Like I'm just very, very much an open book because it's just been so transformative for the way I show up. And it's not just in business, but like in life, period. And it's
Yes.
all about the relationships.
Yeah, I love that you went there. And that's exactly been my experience as well. Once I let those walls down, became my true self at work, at home, everywhere else. The quality of the relationships just skyrocketed because of me, not because of anyone else, in a sense, meaning that the people were always there. I just wasn't open enough to allow them to form that type of relationship with me. And I'm curious to see from your point of view, now that you have this realization, of course, as you coach, you mentor, you work with so many people. When you see someone that's resistant to letting those walls down, to showing who they are, what would be one of the first things you say to them to maybe open up their mind, to inspire them, to empower them to actually embrace vulnerability, embrace authenticity?
Well, I share my journey of failure as a leader, as the Iron Maiden, and what transformed me into more of this whole human leader, as I refer to it. I can think of a number of years ago, there was a man that I hired, an executive that I hired into this one company. And very quickly, I saw actually a little bit of me in my 20s, and just although he was well into his 40s, showing up and it's, hey, I'm the partner, which was the name for the executive at the company I worked, like this, and just the way he showed up. And so I remember having to coach him and give him some direct feedback that I was having people who were coming to me and the way he would interact with them. And so I was able to use my story to say, I'm not sure if this, first of all, one, I operate with radical candor. So I had to have the tough conversation with him. But the transformative piece was me being able to say, look, here's where I came from, and I'm going to tell you more of my story. And I approached it because I felt like I had to prove myself because I was fearful and I was insecure, particularly when I walked into a new environment. So I felt the walls come down slightly. Now, I wasn't super successful with this one, and I ended up leaving the company before I could work the entire process. But I just saw the shift even in that one conversation that I had with him, who initially he was bristling and sitting up, to the moment I started to share that. And just from a perspective of here's how I had to grow and become a very different leader, that at least his response and our conversation flowed in a very different way.
Yeah, that's powerful. And I love that because the power of story, and especially personal story, can definitely open up many doors from what I've seen as well. And I'm curious when it comes to your approach today. You talked about whole human leadership, and you mentioned that you have to have tough conversation at times. How has it changed how you approach those tough conversation? Let's say you have to approach a layoff, or you have to approach an employee and say, hey, things are not working. Here's what we need you to do, or we want you to do.
What I will say is this new way of leading in business generally. I've now been operating this way for probably about 15 years as I made the shift, but it's newer. I think of like for baby boomers, this is not like generationally what they experienced or the generation before them. So approaching leadership from a sense of like humanity and compassion and empathy. What I will say there.
Hey, it's Konstantin here, and I want to take a brief moment to truly thank you for being a part of this incredible journey of transformation. You are the reason we are creating this content. I see you and I appreciate you. Your support truly means the world to me. I want to ask you for a small favor. I'd love for you to join our mission by hitting like, subscribe, or leaving a thoughtful comment or review. Your engagement helps others discover these insights, and together we can continue to unlock the power of authenticity and personal transformation. And if you want to reach out directly to me, send me an email at constantine@unleashthyself.com. I value any and all feedback. Thank you for being a part of this movement. Now, back to the episode.
It does not mean that there is a trade off for strong business performance. Really great leaders will do both. And so
Yeah.
that means being very clear around performance expectations, how success is measured, and holding people accountable to those. But what has changed is like the example I just gave with the leader that I had to have a conversation. When you do have to have these tough conversations, you're doing it from a place of, again, compassion and of empathy, and in my case, storytelling of my own failures in this to help bridge that kind of tough conversation. And then in others, when I think of, I've now been a part of something like 40 merger acquisition or related transactions, 19 of them within the companies I work for, and a couple of them are companies I've bought and others supporting clients. And that usually comes with restructuring, synergies, and some changes. And
Yeah.
so just part of that communication, it has to be done. So I want to be incredibly transparent in the rationale behind how we got here and just the humanizing around the fact that this is a really difficult decision. And I went from I would never show emotions, and I still try to not cry, but there's been moments for people I'm really close to and I've had to let them go because of nothing to do with performance, just the organizational decision. And there's been moments where actually I let the tears cry, which is, and that's a fine line because they're the ones who are impacted, but at the same time I just wanted them to understand that I came to the decision with a very, very heavy heart, and that I would be there to support them, which I think it just at least helps a little bit in some of those really difficult conversations that you can't always control the outcomes for.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what you're touching on is essentially still the vulnerability piece, right? Being human with them and helping others understand that, yes, this was a tough decision, may have not been in your hands fully, and you're there with them, you can feel for them, you have empathy towards them. And every time I had a leader do that in my career, where they showed a bit of emotion, they showed a bit of humanness, let's put it, it went a much longer way than anything else, right? It then becomes not a me versus them versus me. It feels like a team game, and it's like, yeah, sometimes we lose, sometimes we win, but we do it together. And it's such a night and day difference. I see it in my corporate life, and I've been in leadership roles and single contributor roles and whatnot, and it's a huge difference. Someone that comes in very cold, like, like that Iron Maiden with a wall up, it's going to be very hard to build a relationship. And then I would imagine, and I'm curious to see your take, but trust and loyalty are very hard to come by when you're that type of leader.
Oh, I agree. And you just used a word that's super important, which is trust. And I come at a relationship where I give it up front. You don't need to earn it. It's assumed. You can break my trust. However, it strengthens through being vulnerable. It strengthens through authentic connection with people. And that means you learn more about who their whole human is, not just the job that they're performing. And that's critically important. And I'm sure people leave leaders, they don't necessarily leave companies. And that's another reason why, even when I'm having to let someone go, I still want to, do it from a really strong place. My leadership reflects on the organization for sure. But I also, should we ever work together again, I want them to have trust in that new environment around how I'm going to support them as a leader as well.
Yeah, that's very beautiful. Very well said. And yes, you're right. People do leave mostly their leadership, not necessarily the role, the company. And I was reading a research paper the other day where it talked that if you look deeper into that, there's something like 80% would be more likely to stay if their leaders were actually more empathic and do things such as celebrate and recognize small achievements. Nothing, right? Because you, of course, every quarter you can celebrate it, but even beyond that, like they've done something amazing. They've helped someone, a customer, a partner, a coworker, in such a way. Just celebrating people seem to have a huge impact in building the trust you talked about and building, well, that resilience within them. Because if you celebrate them, essentially it gives them permission to celebrate themselves, which is something that I have found most of us are not very good at.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. We talk about being this whole human leader and operating with compassion and vulnerability. Like it's hard work actually. These human skills. It's uncomfortable to put yourself out there. And honestly, there's many times where it's not always received well. The majority of the time I found it has been. Um, but that's difficult. And again, I think there's some societal, there's some generational, just culturally, like what's going to be accepted to do this. So I do find it's really challenging and finding the optimal mix. So you're blending, I don't even know if there's science. I was going to say art and science, but like you're blending some things together in terms of figuring out what that right magic sauce and mix is to get it in business.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of science coming out right now. That's one thing that fascinates me, the psychology of the human brain and how we all interact. And there's a lot of it coming out right now to back up a lot of the things you're talking about, which is like we feel them, we know they're there. But now science is catching up and telling us, well, yeah, that's actually what happens because of the release of various hormones and how essentially how hormones can actually transfer between a human and another. Right. I was reading a paper the other day where essentially if you get stressed as a leader, but you keep in a beautiful shield in front of you to not impact anyone else. Everyone that gets into a meeting with you because of your hormones, serotonin, and anything else that comes out through your pores and can go as far as, I don't know, 5, 6 feet. So
Mm.
people will feel it, but they won't know why because you're keeping up this shield, this facade, and that's it. So it's powerful to see.
Yeah, yeah. And you brought up something important there around actually, this is why I think hybrid is the way forward from a where we work solution. The reality is, first of all, again, people do business with people they like and they trust and they want to do
Yeah.
business with. I do think more of that trust gets built when you can physically be in the rooms. You can see the whites of one another's eyes, not through a camera lens. And the pheromones, not in the sexual way of pheromones, they like that comes
Yeah.
out. And so that's where I think it's incredibly important that we still recognize that we still need in-person work environments to build much more of this connection. And one other thing, going back to just the last conversation as well, I think is really important is when you talked about the recognition for people, et cetera, is how important it is. I think employees more than ever want two things, and one is to feel valued, and that's where
Yes.
just recognizing sometimes the small wins, like, that's even more impactful sometimes than the end of the project and the outcome that's delivered then, like, the little things along the way. And the other thing is purpose. Also show me how I am connected to the broader purpose of the organization. Maybe it's our customers, maybe it's the planet by the work that we do. And that's actually where I think it becomes important for leaders, particularly for like maybe at the executive level, you have the ability to see that, but it's our job to bring that all the way down, even to our new hires. So we want to do work for and companies and the work that we do that has purpose and is aligned to our values. And as we do that, we want to feel valued within the organization.
Yeah, I love that. You touch on purpose, which is a big topic for our show and what I talk about. And you're 100% right. Like, I led a lot of my life, I wouldn't say purposeless, without purpose perhaps, but it wasn't until I sat with myself and found out what truly drives me and then aligned that with the organization, that's when I saw the biggest impact. And you're absolutely right. If the leaders in the organization don't transfer that knowledge down and inspire people to live that mission, to see with that purpose, it's going to be a huge disconnect, and it's going to create a lack of trust, a lack of loyalty, both sides, right? So it's going to create a lot of friction for people.
Hmm.
Absolutely. Awesome. So let me ask you this. I know we talked about the whole human leadership, right? And that's the idea of being empathic and an authentic leader. Is there anything else you can share around that that you would feel like an important advice for either aspiring leaders or for people in leadership roles right now that they could consider moving forward?
Yeah, the whole human leader is something that I'm working to trademark. It's actually the title of a book that I've got coming out. And for me, it's multifaceted. And to be that kind of leader, I do actually think there's these foundational elements or behaviors around you need to be courageous to be this kind of leader, to be authentic, to be vulnerable. And so that comes first. And then the whole human leader is everything from recognizing that we are whole humans who show up in every environment. Like you cannot park your lived experience. You cannot park the really maybe it's just a crappy weekend that you've had. That's going to show up on Monday morning. Like all of that. We are humans who show up. And so
Yes.
for me, it's also why I don't like when people talk to me about work-life balance. It's like, no, no, no. It's just we're integrating all of the pieces together. And so as a leader, let's operate in that way. It means, again, vulnerability. It means authenticity. It means transparency in our communications to the extent that we can. I get it. There's many times I can't share fully transparently with what's happening, but to the extent that I can, including around important decision making. It also means this. I refer to the unseen employee, and this is connected a bit to DEI as well, diversity, equity, inclusion. It's finding people that have great potential and otherwise go unseen because they're not the extrovert that I am. And so they're not the one speaking up in the room, or because they're not touting their strong performance and skills from the past that maybe don't like are a bridge that to the kind of work that they do. It also is, and this is where I think is a leader, and it's my role to identify potential in employees and bridge the skill gap. And
Yeah.
very specifically so as it relates to DEI, right? It is unacceptable now in 2024. We still have less than 10% of the Fortune 500 companies with female CEOs. In 2023, so I haven't seen the new stats, but there were only 6 Black CEOs, one of whom retired, and she was a woman as well. And so like that is just not acceptable. For me, that you need to uncover those unseen employees. You need to go to very untraditional places to find people who've got skill and potential, and you as a leader need to bridge them. So whole human leadership means, again, a bunch of different things, and you art and science again in the right moment in terms of what works in that environment. But it just means, leading in a very different way. And by the last thing I'll say on this and turn it back to you is incentives drive behavior. And so it also means as leaders, we need to start doing things very differently and rewarding the right kind of behaviors and not purely a desired outcome if we want to live and work in very different kind of cultures.
I love all of that, and so many things to unpack and go deeper on. Let's touch on the last one here, the way we drive behavior and rewards. And you're absolutely right. I see it not just within the company I work with, but other companies where they're making the shift and they're looking, okay, how can we reward, recognize, and value people along the process, not just because at the end of the quarter they hit a certain number. And it's tough because most organizations, especially the big ones, that's how they're driven by the stakeholders, by whatnot. They have to look at the quarter numbers and then, of course, the year end numbers. So they want to incentivize people. But as you bring more of that upfront and drive behavior, I'm seeing a lot of impact in pretty much every enterprise organization I'm working with. And it's beautiful to witness, but it's a massive, massive change to the status quo. And I think it's very much needed, like you said.
Yeah, yeah, it is. I'm not a big fan of having to incent leaders to do the right thing. And I'll say that specifically when it comes to DEI. However, the needle's not moving. And so stick or carrot, right? And so I don't know how I felt when I worked at IBM a number of years ago. And when Arvind stepped in as our CEO from Ginny, he gave a portion of our variable compensation was tied into our diversity targets and how is it moving. And like I said, on one hand, I'm like, we shouldn't have to incent our leadership to do the right thing in creating greater diversity within our organization. However, as I said, incentives drive behavior. So I'm like, okay. But then I saw the flip side of that. I saw one leader who refused to let a female member of my team shift to a different role because she counted in his numbers and it would impact his. And so I see the flip side of that as well. So that's disappointing for me on one hand. And so I also think we need to be shifting the model. Many of the companies I've worked for focus on sales, revenue, profit number almost exclusively, but again, where's the culture targets? Where's the DEI targets? Where's encouraging collaboration and teamwork? It actually often drives very different behavior. And so I'm a huge advocate for looking at very different ways. Again, I don't think you need to trade off the business performance that our shareholders expect for having these other metrics that kind of drive the right kind of behaviors, collaboration, engagement, which ultimately then drives your top and bottom line revenue anyways.
Exactly, exactly. And it's beautiful to see, though, the connection, right? As you talk about the whole human leadership aspect, once you become vulnerable, once you become more authentic to yourself, once you understand that everyone else you interact with has flaws and has gifts, and you can help them look more at the gifts and do more of those, then it doesn't matter what color, what sex, what religion, any of that doesn't matter because we're all the same at the end of the day. And once we take out those glasses that only let us look at a certain person because of their religion or because of their orientation, then once that's gone, it's so much easier to bring this along. But you're right, it does require us to challenge the status quo significantly and be the leaders we wish we had at one point in our life.
Agree. Agree. And I think it means also walking the talk. That's the other part of being a different type of leader. We can put fancy vision mission statements up on the wall or on our screensavers or whatever, but at the end of the day, if we're not living and walking true to those values, then again, the trust and credibility is challenged. And so for me, it's also a big part of the brand of Victoria Pelletier is I'm known for being incredibly values and integrity driven. And I've exited out of potential job opportunities and I've said no to working with certain clients because there was not an alignment.
Yeah, I love that. And I see that more and more these days where people are afraid to say no to a job opportunity. They're afraid to say no to working with someone because there's a fear that there is no one else that comes along. So then those values you talked about can be trumped. Those values can be ignored because there's more profit to be had. There's more opportunity to be had. And I'm curious what you say to someone like that comes to you, let's say, maybe on your team, maybe someone looking for coaching and mentorship, and they're like, you know what, but I can't afford to not take on this customer. I can't afford to call them out on A, B, and C.
I have had that. And so I had, and it's tough. And I will tell you, there's I do not compromise on value, my own personal values, however. There's other compromises and trade offs I've made. I have this belief that I don't want to do things that don't bring me personal or professional joy or value. And I say, no, I delegate, I outsource. But, I do need to put food on the table for my family. And so I'm not just quitting a job, although actually I did this year, I quit Accenture and I didn't have another job to go to. But generally, I'm not I would tell people, don't do that. Know that you're going to stay here for a period of time. You don't love it. It's not aligned, but you're doing it for a reason. Again, food on the table or for whatever other reason it is. But be very clear around why you're making that compromise. I personally, like I said, will not do that from a values perspective. So, a couple of years ago, I had the opportunity to lead a very large engagement with a client who wanted to do it was actually a diversity initiative. So, they hired a chief diversity officer. And this is a large company that had been all in the news for discriminating against its not just its customers, but its employees for, let's just say, discrimination. And so they hired a chief diversity officer who then was looking to work with us to like build out a whole program. And I knew after a quick conversation with the leader that, ran that client team that this was just a performative action, lipstick on a pig. And they weren't actually committed to doing this. So I said, no, I didn't say our company should say no and not take the money. I personally am not going to lead this engagement because it is not aligned to my values and I do not believe that they're committed to this. What I will say, and I'm sure there's many of your listeners who are not at the senior level that I now operate. Yes, I get it. That's hard. Like, and if you're an entry level consultant and like you feel like you can't say no, and so you're going to need to find that optimal balance. Hopefully your leader is going to support you as long as you're doing it and you're anchoring to, again, your values. I actually think a tremendous more respect will be given for you by standing up for some of those things.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. Love that, Victoria. And I want to bring you back to something we briefly touched upon. You talked about your personal brand and what you stand behind. And you also talk about the importance of building personal brand, not just for your personal growth, but also professional growth. Let's dive into that a bit because I know a lot of people listening, and myself included here, have been going down this path of, in the past, ignoring and saying, you know what, we don't need a social media presence. We don't necessarily need a brand behind ourselves. We're just an employee, a father, a husband, whatever the case might be. We don't need all of that. But the more, of course, the more I looked into this in the last couple of years, the more I realized, yes, you know what, the personal brand is what will make you stand out and bring more of your gifts to the world. And I'm curious to see what you've discovered and what recommendations you have for others.
Yeah, I didn't realize 20 something years ago that I was focusing on a personal brand. It wasn't the vernacular wasn't there for me at that point. But when I made a shift, that first executive role I got hired into, I was the chief operating officer for a large BPO, business process outsourcing organization. I had come from banking, so business to consumer. And that shift, and all of a sudden we're responding to RFPs, and I've got like sales and like client teams. I realized like we needed to differentiate ourselves. There's many people, and it's often a look at the bottom line, but it's not always a race to the lowest cost. I think I used this phrase at some point as we were talking. People do business with people they like and trust and want to do business with. So 20 something years ago, as I stepped in there, I was trying to, yes, differentiate the company brand, but the unique individuals who were either the salespeople or the people who would then be servicing our clients, they were the ones making the decision. So that's where it started. And what I realized as I looked more and more at it, it was actually very easy to win based upon brand because what I see is so many people, to your point, didn't think they needed a presence. They thought the brand of the organization that they work for and the job title should be enough. So for me, there's like at least four parts foundationally to your brand. There is the first one, yes, your subject matter expertise, like the what you do and in what industry you're known for. That's foundation. That's the easy part. Um,
Yes.
the next three pieces are the part that makes you really like unique and why people want to do business with you. One is storytelling. And so what do we need to know about you? Interests, passions, values. Maybe it's some of the lived experiences and difficult stories you want to share. The next part is what makes you different from people that do what you do. How do you stand up heads and shoulders above them? So for me, I talked about being radically candid. I literally told a CEO last year, working with him on a large restructuring for his organization, said, Patrick, I don't think that you hired me or my organization to tell you what you want to hear. I'm going to tell you what you need to hear. That's a very much a differentiation in terms of my brand. The values and integrity is a blend of actually number two and number three, the who I am, but also the differentiation. And the last part is around legacy and impact. What do you want to be known for? And it's going to evolve and change over time. What I thought I wanted to be known for in my like 20s and what I viewed as success is very different as I got into my 30s and now that I'm getting closer to my late 40s. It's very different, but it's all of those things. And that's what's so important. And I see just people getting it wrong. So funny enough, when I worked at IBM, LinkedIn ranked me their number one social seller worldwide. And so actually IBM tapped me to like develop the personal brand training for its other executives. Although don't hold me accountable because I see some of them still getting it wrong. All they do is push out IBM content consistently as opposed to like talking more about who they are. But it's just something I'm passionate about. And I think it's been a big part of my own career success.
Oh, I love that. I love that. And thank you for sharing those four parts because I could see myself in every single one at different stages. And I was like most people, like you said, stuck in that first one most of the time, just, oh, I'm known for this. I work for this company. I'm only going to push their content. But really, you're more than just a company you work for. You're a unique human being with gifts, with talents, and show that, be vulnerable, share those stories. And I cannot, yeah, that's so important. I love that. Let's touch a bit on the third point you mentioned, that which I love that, and it's something that keeps coming up for me. Is like most people, let's say they hire you at least at first because of something they want,
Mm.
rather than something that they need, because they may not know what they need. And it really makes a difference when you can stand up in your truth and say, I know you hired me for this reason, but here's what I'm seeing, and this is what I believe you need. And that's not an easy conversation to have unless you have the relationship built.
Oh, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. I talk a lot about relationship-based selling, and I don't know the inner workings exactly of your company, but I see it in many of the companies I worked for. They continue to produce these like offerings and basically like a toolkit for their client-facing people to walk around with. And I'm like, to your point, do you know if that's what they need? What is the problem you're trying to solve for them? So I'd rather build a relationship, build trust with them, have me talk through the challenges that they're facing. I also ask them, how's success measured for you personally? I also want to make them look like superstars, right? So, and then I will come and we'll craft a solution. I'm sure we have one, but I'm not going to come with this preconceived notion. And that's going to be built based upon on a trusted relationship.
You're absolutely right. And those toolkits, it's for those situations where you don't have enough information yet. And you can be like, hey, I have these, but let me get to know you a bit better. Let me get to know what you actually want, what makes you successful, you personally and the company. And then we'll tailor a package that's more closely related to what you actually need and can move the needle forward in whatever direction you want to go in. And that's when the power shifts from you being a seller to them being just another customer, to essentially being a relationship, one that's built on trust. So when that customer or that person moves to another company, they'll think about you and be like, oh, you know what, I still want to do business with them because they respected me. They didn't sugarcoat, they didn't give me what they wanted or what they thought I wanted, they gave me what I needed. And that's
Mhm.
such a big transformation.
Yeah, agree. And I think people underestimate the number of decision makers that weigh in, particularly in the business to business world now. And so what I would also say is recognize it's not just that one. Like you've got these multiple there's two books. One's The Challenger Sale, which talks about the different types of buyers, and the Challenger Customer that talks about the dynamic within a business environment. And so just figuring out who all they are, and that it's hard to work for salespeople, but you need to build relationships with and understand again the drivers for those different people.
Yeah, absolutely. And what came up for me here that I would like to ask you as well, we're talking business here, right? It's a business to business, but of course, that's always people to people. How can we take some of the same principles and apply them to our personal life when it comes to building or fostering relationships, either personal, intimate, or just acquaintances? What have you seen work from the business side to the personal side?
Well, I sort of started our conversation by talking about the unhealthy ways I was like not being very good at being resilient and how I saw it in my personal relationships. And the one person I dated at one point who said, you need to bring the walls down. And so I saw this like dramatic shift in the whole human way in which I would lead in business. That just being so, by the way, the Victoria you see in business is the same outside. Like it's authentic Victoria, period. And so the way in which I've built not only I'm now remarried and I look at like the relationship I have with my husband. I've done so much work on me as a human and getting to a better place. So I have like the most deep like connection with him, but it's because I'm completely vulnerable. I've let all that my guard down with him. So I've seen it there to just the friendships that I've built to but I coached my kids' hockey team. So even just the way I interacted with parents and learned to that's not a fun experience coaching hockey so and dealing with
Yeah,
those parents. But the way in which I would choose to engage with them, I'd use some of what I would do in business with them. So it's just been transformative in every aspect of my life, not just in the business world.
I love that. And I can relate to that 100% because I used to be someone, and I'm sure it almost sounds like you're the same, where you had a different persona depending on the environment. I was different at work than I was, let's say, coaching soccer, because that's what I coach, to being with my close friends and being with different groups I wanted to fit in so desperately, even though they weren't necessarily good for me. And I was all these different people, and it's hard to keep them all in check and not put so much burden on yourself and feel like you're so disconnected from your true self.
Agree. It's very freeing.
It
Uh,
is.
yeah,
It is. And it almost feels like you're taking a mask or two off of your face and you're like, oh, this is who I am. You either like me or you don't. And what I have found as well is that we all have our tribes, meaning that we have the people that will resonate with us and we resonate with them. It's not going to be every single person. In fact, for most of us, it might be what, 25, 33, 40% of people out there, maybe 50%, but most of the others, they may not relate with you, and that's fine. You don't have to agree with everyone. They don't have to agree with you. You don't have to belong in every group. Just find the ones that respect you and you respect them, and life is going to be so much more beautiful.
agree.
Yeah. So let's talk a bit about, you have a book coming out, right? Very soon here. You mentioned it's actually probably out already. And is it the one called Unstoppable and Dynamic, Born to Lead and Not to be Led?
No, that's the first book that I
Oh,
wrote.
first one. Okay.
Yeah, and that was a co-authored one. So that experience was a heck of a lot easier. I just had to contribute one chapter to that book, and I took care of everything else. The publishers. I have one that just came out called Influence Unleashed, and it's
Beautiful.
forging a lasting legacy through personal brand. So again,
Oh,
I saw people not doing it well, and I do a lot of public speaking around it. So I decided to write that one. And I have one that will come out in the summer called Whole Human Leadership.
whole human leadership. Awesome.
Mhm.
We'll make sure those are in the show notes. I'll definitely pick up both of them. It's been a pleasure to get to learn more from you today and have such a beautiful conversation. As we're coming up to the end of our conversation here, I'm curious to see, is there anything else coming up for you that you feel is really important to share with the audience? Anything that's top of mind or something maybe we haven't touched upon?
Not necessarily. However, I will leave with one of my favorite quotes, and it's by Georgia Dare, and it says, "Everything you've ever wanted lives on the other side of fear." And so I think about that consistently. I sign most of my social media posts off with at least two hashtags, and one of them is unstoppable, meaning nothing is going to stop me from achieving the goal or objective. That very connected to my resilience, and the other one's no excuses. And by that, we have choice. Trauma, adversity, challenges going to come our way. In many instances, we have no control over those. What we have control over is how we're going to respond and move forward. And even if that's stepping into our fear, I actually think without doing that, without getting ourselves incredibly uncomfortable, the growth is not going to come.
Yes, I love this so much. And honestly, Victoria, that's one of my biggest aha moments from 2023 for myself, which is you have the power to do anything and everything you want, which resonates with pretty much what you're saying. And yes, look at things that perhaps put fear in your eyes, in your mind, and that's probably a sign to go in the direction and see what's keeping you back, and likely success is going to be on the other side of that.
Exactly.
Love it. Love it. Well, I want to thank you so much for your time, for your wisdom. It's been a pleasure to have a beautiful conversation with you.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us on this exploration of personal transformation. Your presence and engagement are at the heart of what we do, and I sincerely appreciate you, your time, and thirst for knowledge, inspiration, and empowerment. Please consider showing your support by hitting like, subscribe, leaving a comment, or writing a review. Your engagement not only fuels our mission, but also helps others discover these insights. For more daily guidance on personal transformation across the mental, emotional, spiritual, and physical realms, be sure to visit our website at unleashthyself.com. You can also find us on Instagram at Unleash Thyself Today, TikTok and YouTube at Unleash Thyself, and there we post daily content designed to inspire and empower you on your journey. If you have any specific thoughts, questions, or feedback, I truly value your input. Or if you'd like to have a conversation with me or work with me, please feel free to email me directly at constantine@unleashthyself.com. I would love to hear from you. Together, we're building a community united in authenticity and purpose. Once again, thank you for being a part of this movement. Until next time, continue to embrace your true self and live a life on purpose, with purpose. See you in the next episode.